Welcome back to An Amber Day, the Functional Nutrition Podcast.
I'm Amber.
I'm your host, Amber Fisher. And this is Daniel Fisher. Say hi, Daniel.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. So, I thought that it might be interesting to do a podcast where we talk a little bit about the partner's perspective of infertility. Daniel and I, of course, as you all who have been listening for a long time know, went through a very long battle with infertility before we were able to have our son Calvin. And I've always wanted to have him on the podcast.
I'm very nervous.
I'm not sure he has wanted to be on the podcast, but I think it's always been interesting to me to hear the male perspective on different things. So I know some of you will probably be interested, especially if you're going through infertility and you're wondering maybe how your husband or partner is feeling about the situation, because as a woman, we can take so much onto ourselves with guilt and shame and all these feelings of embarrassment about, our lack of ability to conceive and all that. So I thought it would be interesting to just have a discussion. So that's what we're going to do. Great. So before I do that, let me just introduce Daniel and tell y'all a little bit about him. Or maybe I'll let you talk about yourself. I don't know.
Yay, my favorite thing.
So Daniel is... Well, another reason I wanted to bring Daniel on the podcast is because Daniel is now helping me with our business. So he's like part of the, I was going to say he's one of the faces of the business, but he's part of the day-to-day operations. So Daniel runs kind of the financial side and business side of the business, taking some of those things off of my plate because I just can't do it all.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. So some of you may start to get to know him as he transitions into that role. And he'll be like taking over some duties from some of my other assistants in the past. So that'll be cool. And he also is the full-time caretaker for our son, Calvin. A noble act.
Sure is.
Yes, I did it for quite a while myself, and that's a job. So yeah, we are really lucky because we get to do something that we always wanted to do, which is run a business together and spend a lot of time together. So that's fun. Okay.
And I get to stay home all the time.
Yes, that is nice.
I don't have an 8 to 5 anymore.
Yeah, that's great. Previously, what did you do previously, Dan?
So I went to school for engineering, and I did that for a number of years, and went back to school for my MBA and did not use it at all. Because then the pandemic hit and I lost my engineering job.
Now you do get to use your MBA.
I guess so.
Running my
small business MBA.
My business. My empire, as they say. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's get into today's topic, right? Let's talk about infertility. So why don't you tell everybody how we met? But they'd want to know that.
You haven't told them yet?
If y'all see me drinking this, for those of you watching on YouTube, yes, this is product placement. Although I'm not officially sponsored by Poppy Soda, but if you're listening, I will definitely do a deal with you. I love this stuff, guys. It's really good. I love soda. Used to be a huge Diet Coke addict, and I like the bubbles. So this is really good because it has it's very low in carbs. It has the bubbles, and it has some prebiotics in it too. So I don't know. I just think they're really good. The other ones I like are Zevia, but I have been really in love with these Poppy ones lately. So if you see me sipping on that, that's what this is. So tell us how we met.
Okay. I can't believe you haven't told them yet. So we met in college.
Yes.
And we had the what's the word? Glorious first encounter in a car on the way to a speech and debate retreat.
Glorious first encounter.
Yes.
That's accurate.
Yes.
So I remember that very vividly when I remember the moment I met him because I guess it felt significant, although I don't think I knew that at the time, but I remember the moment we met, which, I don't know. Do you remember?
Well, yes.
No, I mean, do you remember the moment that you met other people?
Oh.
Like, I usually don't remember the moments when I meet certain
people. From college, a few. But I remember when we got together, or when we first met at that, got in the carpool and everything. Yeah, that's probably my most vivid memory of when I first met anybody from college.
Yeah,
which is weird.
That is weird when you think about it, right? It's like it was a very significant moment, I guess. And like our brains knew it was significant, but not really why yet. So anyway, we both joined the speech and debate team, which
it's a great foundation for your relationship.
Yes,
get
highly recommend.
Debaters.
19. Yeah, a lot of. So then, fast forward, we got married in 2011, and do you remember when we kind of decided to start, like, thinking about kids? Like, do you remember how that happened?
Not really. Do you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I remember. I'll just say what I do remember. I remember being in Lubbock, and we knew that we weren't ready, like, necessarily, let's start now. But we knew it would be coming up soon. Because we had only been married a year, maybe a year and a half at that point. Mm-hmm. And we were like, well, we wanted to wait a couple of years, get used to each other first, build our lives, and then introduce the child into that life. But we also somehow just knew, maybe because of the PCOS diagnosis, that it was going to be a process. And so we knew that we should just get started and make sure that everything was working correctly, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess you probably don't remember this, but when we were living in Lubbock, I went to see a infertility specialist, like
the doctor.
It was an IVF clinic, yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of to ask them, like, hey, is there anything that I can do for my PCOS? Like, I thought maybe there might be I had heard of like ovarian drilling, and so I thought maybe that they could do like a procedure on me. I also was a little concerned. I thought I might have endometriosis. So anyway, I went, and of course they were like, no, there's nothing we can do. But then they wanted to, the doctor asked to take a biopsy because it had been a while since I had a period. And that was my first biopsy experience, which I've spoken about before. It was extremely traumatic. But because of what I was kind of telling him about my whole situation, he warned me, and he said that it would probably take a long time to get pregnant, and so that I should, start right away. Or start early, he said, I remember, because he's like, it's probably going to take you a while. So that was discouraging. But
yeah, I remember that.
Also kind of nice that he warned us, because I don't know about you all, but I always appreciate it when people tell me the truth. I don't really like to be coddled or like, I don't know. I just prefer people to be straight up with me. So
yeah, don't try to pass off the best case scenario as what's most likely to happen.
Right.
Unless it's actually true, but it rarely is.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your experience with all the like testing and stuff that we had to go through.
It was just scary. Mm-hmm. Was predominantly the emotion I had, the uncertainty of everything, and not just not knowing how the test results are going to happen. Like it's much more than that. It's that plus what does this mean? You get introduced to a lot of really big scary words and a lot of big scary names of medicines and procedures, and we're not doctors, we're not trained, we don't know what all of this means. Like, we can Google it like any other normal person with internet access, but we're not going to understand it as much as we want to, I guess. So yeah, worry and fear and frustration with all that was probably the predominant emotion that I felt. And I just didn't like to see you go through it. It didn't feel fair. It didn't feel right. And there's nothing I could do about it.
Yeah.
So that helplessness also kind of sucked.
Do you feel like it was harder because like all the issues were really my issues? Like there was no male factor issues here.
Yeah. Even after I got tested or had my sperm tested and everything came back normal for me, count, mobility, whatever, that almost made it worse. Motility, sorry. It's the same thing.
Yeah,
it's about how fast they move. It just made it worse because not only because I didn't blame you, but I felt there were many times where you thought that I blamed you, and I didn't, and I couldn't convince you that I didn't, and it wasn't your fault. Nobody knew. Nobody could have predicted. There's no like genetic tests that we run on infants to see if, or infant girls to see if they're gonna have PCOS or not.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me about that now is that I lived for so many years with I carried a lot of shame about having PCOS and felt a lot like it was my fault because there must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with the way that I'm eating. And that at first I discovered nutrition and had this like, great epiphany that like, wow, food can impact your health and your hormones. And I had never made that connection before, so that was exciting. But then as the years kind of wore on and I continued to have issues and I just couldn't seem to like figure it out or stick to things long enough, maybe I started to really blame myself a lot and feel like a lot of the PCOS was sort of my fault. And I know a lot of my clients feel this way too, that they're like, it's my internal laziness or whatever that means that's causing the PCOS. But recently I had some genetic testing done, and that took so much guilt and shame off of me that I just like didn't even realize I was still carrying. Because of course I don't believe that PCOS is any person's fault. I do think that the food that we eat can either contribute to symptoms or can help reduce symptoms, but the fundamental issue with developing the condition in the first place I don't think is anyone's fault. But that's always easier to tell other people than to tell yourself, right? So when I got the genetic testing and I found that I actually have a couple of genetic variants that are trending towards insulin type issues and to difficulties processing extra hormones and things like that, I realized like, wow, a lot of my issues, not that they were predestined or predetermined, but those predispositions were always there. And my life from this point on is not so much about saying like, let me cure this condition or this issue, but rather like, how can I manage this so that it doesn't so that these genes don't express in my life to whatever extent I can. And I'm still figuring that out for myself. But it took a lot of guilt off of me because I did feel for a long time that it was my, that I wondered if like you maybe wished that you hadn't, married me or something, because like if you had known.
The only thing I wished was that you didn't have the issues.
Yeah.
I never once thought that this was any kind of deal breaker or grounds for breaking up or anything like that.
Like if you had known before we got like deeply involved, because obviously we kind of knew that things might be an issue when I first got diagnosed with PCOS, so right. We were still dating at the time. But like if you had known before we ever started dating that I might have issues with infertility, or that I for sure was going to, do you think that you would have made a different decision?
No, I really don't.
Do you feel like most men feel that way? I mean, would you say that that's probably pretty consistent with?
Yeah, because there's a lot of different options out there for, having children you're a man who has that as a goal in life. You don't pick the wife based on what you think the children are going to be like. You pick the wife because you like the woman. You know, you marry her for her, not for what you think the kids are going to be. So while I always wanted to have children once I was grown and married, I knew that there were, even if we couldn't have it biologically, that there were going to be options. You know, expensive options, sure, but options.
All the options with this are expensive, right?
Yeah, adoption, surrogacy, even fostering, you know, can be a lengthy, if not financially burdensome process, than emotionally. But, you know, those are sacrifices that I think most men that really want to have kids would make.
So, what about when, okay, so after we went to the clinic the first time, we were they were kind of pushing us towards IVF. You remember that?
Yeah. And we were debating whether they were pushing us there because they thought it was the right thing for us, or were they pushing us there because that's just where they made their money.
Yeah, and we were, at that time, young. We were,
poor.
I think, 24 years old.
Yeah, we just moved here to San Antonio from Lubbock.
Yeah, we'd only been here like a year or something.
So maybe 25.
We were pretty young, and honestly, no offense at all to anybody who has kids at that age or younger. I mean, everybody has a different path, but for us, we weren't like particularly interested in having kids at that time. It was more like we just felt like we were going through the processes that we needed to go through, I guess. Like,
yeah, if we had gotten pregnant, great, but we weren't in any rush.
Yeah, that's how it felt. And then that's when I ended up getting diagnosed with cancer. Was soon after that.
Yeah.
And so then it was sort of like, oh, this is why they recommended IVF. You know, I didn't quite understand, I guess, that with a history of having hyperplasia as many times as I had, that could develop into cancer. Like, I had been told that it might, right? But that it was a very, very rare thing, and most of my doctors acted like there was no risk at all for me. It was only that one IVF doctor who was like, yeah, things might be a little tricky. You know, you might want to do IVF because I'm a little worried about this issue. And we just kind of thought that they were pushing us because they wanted our money. And of course, extremely financially difficult to make IVF work.
Yeah, it's going to be north of $25,000 in most cases.
So how did you feel about that? About the fact that then we were like kind of roped into this whole expensive process in order to just have the chance to have a child?
Well, at that point, you're talking about just a couple years ago, right before we had Calvin?
Sure.
At that point, it was our last option. Mm-hmm. Well, not last option, but last good option, I guess, to have a child that was half you, half me. Mm-hmm. So I was all on board.
So before we went through IVF, this was 2018 that we finally did go through IVF. We went through like several years where we kind of took a break from, maybe not several years, but a few years where we took a break from the whole fertility treatment process. At that point, we had done like, Clomid and tried naturally, and I don't remember if I had done Femara yet or if that was later.
No, you had.
So we took some time off. Tell them a little bit about like what was going through your head at that time.
I had kind of given up a little bit. Not given up totally on having kids, but at the time you were working for a foster care child placement company. And so I was kind of starting to make myself get used to the idea that maybe that was our path. Mm-hmm. Maybe fostering to adopt or something like that. Because I just didn't see financially how we were going to come up with $25,000.
Yeah. That was like such a huge blow. And I think, obviously, looking back, I feel like we over worried about that because now I realize how much they want you to go through, they want you to pay for IVF. So a lot of these clinics are like willing to work with you on helping you find financing, and there are a lot of loan programs and things like that. But at the time, it felt so out of reach, this idea that we'd have to save this huge amount of money. And we didn't want to ask people for it and everything. So I remember just being kind of like burned out of the whole process. And we did a lot of like back and forth about whether we even wanted kids at that point.
Well, I think we both still wanted kids, but it was, is it worth it? Is it worth going through any more failure, rejection, bad news?
Yeah. We sort of just started to feel like, or at least I did, that I wasn't sure that all of it was worth it. Like, I wasn't sure that I wanted to put all this money on the line that potentially wouldn't go anywhere. And I was trying to come to terms with the idea of like, well, if I didn't have any children, like, could I still be happy? Like, would I still have a fulfilling life? And I remember having conversations about that with you. And we sort of, at least this is how I remember it. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I remember us coming to terms with the idea that like, okay, if we didn't have kids, like, we could still be happy, and we're coming up with like dreams of what our life would look like if we were child free.
A lot more travel and a lot more freedom to do adult things, and we'd still go to Disney World.
Yeah, we love Disney. But I think too, there was always this like element of sadness to those conversations.
Always.
Too. It's like, the whenever I'd see the intro to Up come on, I would just sob, because anyone who's gone through infertility,
I don't know anyone who hasn't seen that intro yet at this point, but if you are that one person in this world who hasn't seen it, go watch it, but bring a box of tissues.
I remember like a lot of things would make me cry. There was this Christmas commercial. Elton John was in it. It was for pianos. It was an advertisement for pianos.
That stupid commercial.
Yes, and it was like Elton John like going back in time. But the part that made me like sob was when he was like a little boy and he comes down the stairs and his mom and grandma had bought him a piano. Oh my god, I'm gonna cry thinking about it now.
Such a stupid commercial.
It's so sad. The nostalgia is so sad. But yeah, like I think we were just very much like going through a grieving process with it. We went through all the stages. Like we went through anger. At least I did.
Yeah.
Anger, sadness, denial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about when we did finally decide to go through IVF.
Okay.
Tell me your experience of that process.
I was probably a little hesitant just because I didn't know if it would work. And I thought maybe this will just be a waste of time and money again. But at the same time, I still really wanted to have our child or children. So, yeah, I was on board with taking that risk.
Do you remember like the process of everything?
Vaguely. It's kind of blurry. I remember you got the recommendation from your OBGYN at the time to work with that clinic, the new clinic, right?
Yeah.
And so we kind of felt like it was, well, this is going to be our last chance. We're in a better situation financially. It's been a couple of years. You'd had your cancer, and then you'd had it taken care of. And so this was our hour window.
Well, do you remember like going to all those appointments and everything? Like, what was that like for you?
It was a combination of exciting and really annoying. Because twice a week, I would go with you to the doctor's office, and we'd have to check in and wait, and then talk to them, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know, it was a process, and it happened, a lot. And then the shots at home.
Yes. He did all my shots for me.
That was fun.
All except my trigger shot, which my lovely friend Gabby did for me.
Oh, yeah.
Because it had to be, you know how the trigger shot has to be like timed perfectly. It has to be exactly at this certain time.
Yeah.
In preparation for your retrieval. And I was at work and he was working, and so I had to take it to work, and then I tried, guys, but I could not give myself shots. I just couldn't do it. So Gabby did that for me. So Gabby has been on the podcast before a couple of times. If you guys want to go listen to podcasts, she's a good friend of mine. Yeah, that was a lot, all those shots and stuff. I feel like for me, the shots leading up to the retrieval were not so bad. It was like the progesterone shots afterwards.
Really?
That were awful. Yeah.
To me, it was just shots.
Yeah.
I wasn't getting any of them, so it didn't matter what was in the syringe from my standpoint.
Yeah. But especially, so we did, let's see, well, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but we did the one retrieval.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like out, obviously,
right,
under anesthesia. So how did that go?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
You weren't there for the retrieval?
Well, I was in the waiting room. They didn't let me in the room with you.
I don't know why I thought you were there.
Mm-mm.
Huh.
So I was just in the waiting room, waiting for news. Like any other surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it took longer than they told me it was going to take. And then they wouldn't tell me anything about it until you had fully woken up from the anesthesia. But I remember we were really happy with the number of eggs they were able to retrieve.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the exact number, 22 or something?
18.
18? Okay.
18 that were... 18 and then...
18 that were mature.
No, 12 of them were mature or something. And
yeah,
then,
I forget the exact numbers. I used to know them all by heart.
I know.
But it was kind of depressing, like, as we went along to see that number just drop. We started with 18, but only 12 of them were mature enough to be fertilized, but then only 10 of them actually fertilized normally, but then only 8 survived to this point. Only 5 of them survived to that point.
Yeah, I think in the end we had 6 that got like frozen.
I thought it was 5.
Either 5 or 6 that got like frozen and actually tested, genetic tested.
And then after the genetic testing, only 2 were chromatically
2 were normal. That was really hard.
Yeah, we started with 18 and we ended up with 2. I
remember being very naive about IVF before we went through it and thinking like, oh, you do IVF and you do an egg retrieval and then you'll get all these eggs and you can just like freeze them. And then, whenever you're ready to have a sibling, you just try another one, right? And my fertility doctor explained to me that it's actually pretty normal to only get a couple of genetically normal embryos after retrieval, especially for some reason after the first retrieval. He said that it's much more common to have like a poorer response to that first stimulation than like maybe to a second one, but that it's also extremely normal to only get a couple of good quality eggs. And that was or embryos, I'm sorry, that was like kind of a blow because it was naive when I look back on it, but I was thinking like, okay, we would do this retrieval and then we'd get to like have siblings and stuff on ice. Just pull them out when we were ready for them, right?
Yeah, no, I thought that too.
And that's really not how it goes. So it came down to 2.
Yeah.
We had a female embryo and a male embryo, and the female one looked better.
Yeah, they grade them after they've grown for a few days. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the female graded out better than Calvin.
Yeah.
So we went with her first in the first implantation.
Yep.
Because we're like, well, let's start with the best chance.
Yeah, that's what they recommended. They were like, this one's your best chance, so we'll do that. And that was a blow too, because when they're telling you that this is your best chance, but then the best chance doesn't work out.
Well, yeah, and let's back up just a little bit to the actual implantation.
Oh yeah.
These things are microscopic, right? So what they do is they put it in a little pipette, but they put an air bubble in the pipette first, and then they put the embryo, and then they put another little air bubble. Mm-hmm. That way, when they're looking at the ultrasound and they inject, is that the right word? The embryo in, they can't see the embryo on the ultrasound, but they can see the two air bubbles. And then they check the pipette, I guess, just to make sure.
You can see the embryo with the naked eye, but it's like the tip of the head of a pin. It's very small.
Something crazy. I'm a little fuzzy on the details now, but she was still on the pipette, right? The embryo during the first retrieval, it didn't come. It didn't get transferred. So yeah, for some reason
the embryo didn't come out.
And so this whole time I'm wondering, on the second attempt, did she come out then, or did she? I don't know. This is weird. Fall on the floor because the way they did it was they have the microscope and the embryo in one room, and then the implantation is happening in the room next to it. So there was probably about 30 feet that somebody had to walk, holding this thing. Mm-hmm. Is that even possible? I don't know, but I was thinking well, was she even implanted? If she was our best chance, and she didn't take, but the second one, Calvin did. He wasn't as rated as good.
Well, the thing that was different though between our first transfer and our second was that I had a different level of progesterone.
Yes.
I had more, and I think that is what made the difference, because that's always been my issue, is not having enough progesterone, and I just feel like...
Well, and Dr. Neal gave you, what was it, 4 extra hours or something then? Or was it 12 extra hours?
Yeah, it was 12 extra hours.
12 extra hours for it to hit your system.
To take effect, yeah.
Take effect. I remember talking to him about that. He's like, I've had pretty good success with this, but it's just purely a trial. There's no studies on this or any kind of data collection as to whether or not this actually does work or not. But in the 3 times I've tried it before, it worked well.
To me, it made a lot of sense, because progesterone has always been the thing that saved me. So progesterone is what saved me from cancer. Progesterone has always made me feel good. And I felt like I needed more too. So I think that's what made the difference between the first and the second one. But also the first one was so close to the retrieval. I was a lot more stressed at that time of the year because I was helping. It was Valentine's Day, and I always help my mom. She's a florist, and so there was a lot of stress on me around that time. And plus, we knew that was it was almost like psyched myself out because I knew that was our best chance. So I was more stressed.
Yeah, and when we went for number 2, they actually told us, the odds aren't great, but, we have the embryo. We might as well try.
Yeah.
Was kind of the attitude that they had.
We had a special meeting with our doctor, who was sweet. He met with us, didn't charge us for it, but met with us for an hour just to kind of he had no answers, but he knew that it's important when you've gone through this to just kind of talk through what happened.
Yeah.
And so he did that, and he kind of just answered a lot of our questions. And our biggest question was do we even bother with this embryo? Mm-hmm. Is it worth it? Because emotionally we didn't want to go through that again. And we were thinking we were going to need to do another retrieval. So he sort of encouraged us, like, yeah, it's still worth trying. And
yeah.
Then we had our baby.
Then we had Calvin. That was him.
But, you know.
Against all odds.
Against all odds. But my pregnancy was very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
What was that like for you?
Oh, that was great fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you always had something seemed like was going wrong, you know, whether or not you were bleeding internally or you were spotting and bleeding externally, or not feeling well, like, you know.
I had a subchorionic hemorrhage.
That's what it was. I forgot.
It's like a.
I can picture it on the ultrasound. I couldn't remember what it was called.
Yeah, it's like a bruise inside, but sometimes it's an active, like, growing bruise. That's when it's a hemorrhage, and then sometimes it's like it clots, and that's when it's a hematoma. But it can endanger the pregnancy, especially early on, because it can detach the embryo. So it was very scary. Mm-hmm. And I carried that thing all the way through the pregnancy. It came out when I gave birth. It was attached to the umbilical cord, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Because yeah, at the anatomy scan, they lost track of it, and they were like, "It's gone." You know, finally, it's gone. And then when I had Calvin, I read the report, the pathology report of the placenta, and it said that there was a subchorionic hemorrhage on the umbilical cord. Oh. Fun.
Yeah, fun.
So that was fun. I was on bed rest most of the pregnancy. And subchorionic hemorrhages are common in IVF, which I did not know. Nobody told me that. I wish I would have known that. So if you are planning to go through IVF, you know, you should be prepared that that's something that might happen, and it usually works itself out, but like, it's still scary. And then the other thing that's more common in IVF pregnancies, and also more common with PCOS, is preterm labor. Mm-hmm. And of course, I went into labor at 30 weeks and had my son 10 weeks early. So
30 weeks, 5 days.
I mean, we could do an entire podcast on what it's like to be a parent of a NICU baby.
Oh, fun.
Maybe we will.
That's great. That's great fun. Everybody should try that sometime.
Yeah. That was a lot. But he's fine now. He's happy and healthy, and
he's a tornado.
He thinks every bird says caw.
Uh-huh. He thinks every drink belongs to him.
Yes. And anytime something drops or he throws it, it's an uh-oh moment.
Oh, yeah.
He says, uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh.
Mm-hmm. Even sometimes before it hits the ground.
Uh-huh.
He hasn't even thrown it yet, and he's already saying, uh-oh.
Or like, I'll go get him in the morning from his crib, and he usually has thrown his pacifier out on the ground because he just can't help himself. He has to throw stuff, you know. And then as soon as I come in, he looks at me and he goes, uh-oh, you know, to let me know that he had thrown his passy out. And then I'm like, oh, you threw out your passy.
Again.
Would you say that all the things that we went through were worth it?
No. Just kidding. Yes, of course. Yes, it was absolutely worth it. I'd do it all again. The financial burden, the emotional burden, it wasn't too high.
I think I would do it again even if Calvin hadn't been the outcome, just because I'm just glad that I went through that and saw like what my body could or couldn't do. I always feel like when people give up before IVF, I mean, that's obviously their choice and their decision, but I've never understood that thought process, because to me it's like, hey, we have science, modern scientific, you know, interventions, and like, if I can find a way to make it work, like, I'm going to try it, you know? So there was never a question for me that I would do IVF if I had to, but yeah. Well, thank you for being on the podcast today, Daniel. Anything that you want to share with any of these people listening? Like any words of wisdom for husbands going through this, or partners going through this, or for the women out there listening?
I guess for the guys, forgive your wife. Be extra nice to her. She deserves it.
Forgive your wife.
She's gonna go through times where she's extra frustrated at you, maybe for no reason that you can discern. She's dealing with a lot, so cut her some slack. Love her a little extra.
That's probably good advice, no matter what.
Okay, well, don't go too far.
I would say. Well, that's going to be it for today's podcast. Let's see, before I wrap up, a couple of things to just remind you all. I did want to tell you that I am currently working on a new, some new courses, some online courses for those going through PCOS, and then also for those going through IVF. So I'm going to have a functional approach to PCOS course. I'm going to have a functional approach to IVF nutrition course, and those things will be available sometime, hopefully this fall. I'm working on them now. And in the meantime, I'm putting my PCOS group on hold for a few months just to kind of give myself time to work on that because I just can't do everything. So look forward to all of that if you are interested in it. And the best places you can find me right now are if you follow me on Instagram, Amber Fisher Nutritionist. That's where I'm the most active, and I do a lot of writing about these topics and everything. If you have questions for the podcast, I am answering questions now. So there is, in the show notes here, you'll see a link to a Google form where you can ask me questions, and I would love to answer your questions. Seriously, I would love them. They don't need to just be nutrition based. If you want to ask me any question, I would love to answer it. I love questions.
It'll give her content.
Yes, I need content, please. And also, on that note, if you have a chance, if you're listening to this on Apple or you have an iTunes account, if you wouldn't mind leaving the podcast a 5-star review, it really helps a lot to getting the podcast out to other people and just spreading the word. And I appreciate it greatly. So thank you for that. And we will talk to you all. Well, I will talk to you all next week. Bye.